The December wind cut through Boston's Back Bay like a knife, sending pedestrians hurrying past the decorated storefronts with their heads down and collars up. Nobody noticed the German Shepherd mix huddled beneath the awning of Chen's hardware store, his brown and black coat matted with ice and grime. He'd been on the streets for 3 weeks now, ever since his previous owner had moved away and left him behind like unwanted furniture. The dog, who had once answered to the name Rocky but had almost forgotten it, watched the bundled-up humans pass by with wary golden eyes. Some hurried past without a glance. Others looked at him with pity but kept walking, their arms full of shopping bags and wrapped presents. One woman paused, seemed about to approach, then her companion pulled her away with a whispered warning about rabies and fleas. Rocky's stomach growled. He hadn't eaten in 2 days, unless you counted the half-eaten sandwich he'd found in a dumpster behind the Italian restaurant on Newbury Street. His ribs were starting to show through his fur, and the cold Massachusetts winter was taking its toll on his weakened body. "Get out of here!" Mr. Chen emerged from his shop with a broom making threatening gestures. "You're scaring away my customers. Go on, get!" Rocky scrambled to his feet and trotted down the sidewalk, his limp more pronounced than usual. He'd injured his front left paw a week ago, stepping on broken glass in an alley. The wound had mostly healed, but it still ached in the cold. 6 blocks away, in a brownstone apartment overlooking Commonwealth Avenue, Sarah Martinez sat at her kitchen table surrounded by unpaid bills. At 34, she'd imagined her life would look different by now. The divorce had been finalized 8 months ago, leaving her with primary custody of her 7-year-old daughter Emma and a mountain of debt her ex-husband had conveniently forgotten to mention during their marriage. "Mum, can we get a Christmas tree this year?" Emma appeared in the doorway, still wearing her school uniform. Her brown eyes were hopeful but cautious, as if she already knew the answer. Sarah's heart clenched. "Sweetie, we talked about this. Money is really tight right now. Maybe next year." "You said that last year too." Emma's voice was quiet, resigned. She'd grown up too fast over the past year, Sarah thought with a pang of guilt. "It's okay, Mom. I understand." But Sarah could see the disappointment in her daughter's eyes as Emma retreated to her room. Through the thin walls, she heard Emma talking to her stuffed animals, creating some elaborate Christmas fantasy where everything was perfect and nothing was broken. Sarah returned to the bills with renewed determination. She'd picked up extra shifts at the hospital where she worked as a nurse, but between rent, utilities, Emma's after-school care, and the lawyer fees still lingering from the divorce, there was barely enough to cover the basics. A Christmas tree felt like an impossible luxury. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister Jennifer. "Coming by tomorrow to drop off some groceries. Don't argue with me." Sarah smiled despite herself. Jennifer had her own family to worry about, but she never let Sarah struggle alone. Still, accepting charity stung, even from family. That evening, Sarah bundled Emma up in her warmest coat for the walk to the corner store. They needed milk and bread, staples they couldn't do without. The temperature had dropped to 20 degrees and the weather forecast predicted snow overnight. "Mom, look." Emma tugged on Sarah's sleeve as they turned onto Newbury Street. "That dog is shaking." Sarah followed her daughter's gaze to where Rocky sat pressed against a brick wall, trying to shield himself from the wind. Even from a distance, she could see he was in bad shape, thin, dirty, and clearly suffering from the cold. "Can we help him?" Emma's eyes were already filling with tears. "Mom, he's going to freeze." "Emma, we can't." Sarah stopped herself. How many times had she told her daughter they couldn't afford things? How many times had she watched that light dim in Emma's eyes? "We don't know if he's friendly. He might bite." "He won't. Look at his eyes, Mom. He's just scared." Sarah studied the dog more carefully. Emma was right. There was no aggression in the animal's posture, only exhaustion and fear. She thought of her own struggles, of being alone and scared, and not knowing where the next meal would come from. "Okay," she heard herself say, "but we approach slowly. If he shows any signs of being aggressive, we leave immediately. Deal?" "Deal." They moved closer, and Rocky's ears perked up. Sarah could see him tense, ready to run, but Emma knelt down several feet away and extended her hand slowly. "Hi, puppy," Emma said softly. "We're not going to hurt you. Are you hungry?" Rocky's tail gave a tentative wag. Something in the little girl's voice reminded him of kindness, of a time before he'd been abandoned. Slowly, keeping his body low and non-threatening, he crawled toward her. "That's it," Emma whispered. "Good boy. You're such a good boy." When Rocky was close enough, Emma gently touched his head. His fur was cold and wet, and she could feel him trembling. "Mum, we have to take him home. Please, it's almost Christmas. We can't leave him out here." Sarah knew this was a terrible idea. They could barely feed themselves, let alone a dog. There would be vet bills, food costs, The security deposit on the apartment explicitly said no pets. But looking at her daughter's face, the first real smile she'd seen in months, Sarah couldn't say no. "Just for tonight," Sarah said, knowing even as she spoke that it was a lie they both wanted to believe. "Until we can find him a proper home." Emma threw her arms around her mother. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Sarah purchased milk, bread, and a small package of deli ham at the corner store, using precious dollars she'd been saving for Emma's Christmas present. The dog followed them home, staying close to Emma's side, as if he knew he'd found something precious and didn't want to let it go. Their apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms, a cramped kitchen, and a living room barely big enough for their second-hand couch and coffee table. But it was warm, and after Sarah toweled Rocky off and Emma fed him the ham slice by slice, watching with delight as he ate eagerly, it felt more like home than it had in months. "Can we name him?" Emma asked, already curled up on the couch with the dog's head in her lap. Rocky had settled in as if he'd always belonged there, his eyes already drooping with exhaustion. "He might already have a name, sweetie. He probably belongs to someone. He doesn't have a collar, and he's so skinny. I don't think anyone's been taking care of him." Emma stroked the dog's ears gently. "I want to call him Noel, because we found him at Christmas." Sarah sat down beside them, running her hand over the dog's matted fur. He looked up at her with those soulful golden eyes, and she felt something shift in her chest. "Noel it is, just for now." That night, Sarah lay awake worrying about vet bills and dog food, and what she would tell the landlord. But from Emma's room, she could hear her daughter's soft, happy breathing, and the gentle sound of Noel, she was already thinking of him by that name, settling into his spot at the foot of Emma's bed. For the first time in months, her daughter had gone to sleep without crying. That had to count for something. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, covering Boston in a blanket of white, and in that small apartment on Commonwealth Avenue, a broken family and a broken dog began unknowingly to heal each other. Sarah woke to the smell of smoke. For a moment, still foggy with sleep, she thought she was dreaming. Then her nursing training kicked in, and she bolted upright, her heart hammering against her ribs. The acrid scent was faint, but unmistakable. Something was burning. She threw off the covers and rushed into the hallway. It was 6:47 a.m. according to the clock on the wall, and pale winter light filtered through the living room windows. Everything looked normal. No flames, no visible smoke. But the smell was stronger now, and it seemed to be coming from below. "Emma!" Sarah called, moving quickly to her daughter's room. "Emma, wake up!" Emma sat up groggily, Noel immediately alert beside her. The dog's ears were pressed back against his head, and a low whine emanated from his throat. He jumped off the bed and began pacing near the door, his anxiety palpable. "Mom, what's wrong?" "I'm not sure yet, baby. Get dressed quickly. Put on your warmest clothes." Sarah's mind raced as she pulled on jeans and a sweater. The apartment building was old, built in the 1920s, with outdated wiring and a temperamental heating system. She'd complained to the landlord twice about the strange electrical smell in the basement laundry room, but nothing had been done about it. Noel's whining grew more insistent. He scratched at Emma's bedroom door, then ran to the apartment's front door, then back to Emma, as if trying to tell them something urgent. "It's okay, boy," Emma said, kneeling to stroke his head. But Noel wouldn't be calmed. He barked once, sharp and commanding, a sound he hadn't made since they'd brought him home 3 days ago. Sarah opened the front door carefully. The hallway was still clear, but the smoke smell was definitely stronger. She could hear it now too, a faint crackling sound coming from somewhere below them. They lived on the 3rd floor of a 4-story building. "We're leaving. Now." Sarah grabbed her phone and wallet, stuffing them in her coat pocket. "Emma, your coat. Don't worry about anything else." "But my stuffed animals." "Now, Emma." The urgency in her mother's voice cut through any protest. Emma grabbed her coat and mittens, and Noel stayed pressed against her leg as they moved into the hallway. Sarah knocked hard on their neighbor's door. "Mr. Patterson, Mrs. Chen, there's smoke in the building." Doors began opening up and down the hallway. Mr. Patterson, an elderly widower who lived alone with his cat, emerged in his bathrobe looking confused. The Chen family, a young couple with twin babies, stumbled out looking alarmed. "Everyone needs to evacuate," Sarah said, her nursing training keeping her calm even as her heart raced. "Take the stairs, not the elevator. Move quickly, but don't run." She was already dialing 911 as she spoke, reporting the smoke and their location. The fire department dispatcher told her they were on their way, units already deployed. Someone else in the building must have called too. The stairwell was filling with residents now, a chaotic stream of people in various states of dress, some clutching pets or valuables. Sarah kept Emma close, one hand on her daughter's shoulder as they descended. Noel stayed right with them, his body tense but controlled. as if he understood the gravity of the situation. By the time they reached the ground floor and emerged onto Commonwealth Avenue, smoke was visible from the building's basement windows. The cold December morning air hit them like a slap, and Sarah realized she'd forgotten to grab Emma's hat. She pulled off her own and tugged it over her daughter's ears. Fire trucks were already screaming down the street, their sirens splitting the early morning quiet. Residents clustered on the sidewalk across the street, watching in various states of shock and fear as firefighters began unrolling hoses. "Mum, is our home going to burn down?" Emma's voice was small, scared. "I don't know, sweetie, but we're safe. That's what matters." Sarah did a quick mental count of the people she'd seen on their floor. The Pattersons, the Chens, the elderly woman in 3C whose name she'd never learned, the college students in 3D. Everyone seemed to be accounted for. But then she remembered. "Oh, God," she breathed. Mrs. Kowalski. Mrs. Kowalski lived alone in apartment 4B, directly above them. She was 78 years old, diabetic and nearly deaf. She wouldn't have heard the commotion, wouldn't have smelled the smoke through her constantly closed door. Sarah grabbed the nearest firefighter. "There's an elderly woman on the 4th floor, apartment 4B. She's hearing impaired. I don't see her out here." The firefighter nodded grimly and spoke into his radio. Sarah watched, her stomach churning, as 2 firefighters in full gear entered the building. The smoke was thicker now, billowing from the basement and first-floor windows. Other residents were being questioned, and someone mentioned that the building superintendent, Mr. Hernandez, had been working on the electrical panel in the basement yesterday evening. Emma pressed against Sarah's side, and Noel sat alertly between them, his eyes fixed on the building. Despite everything, Sarah felt a strange gratitude for the dog's presence. He'd been the one to alert them, his agitation giving them those precious extra minutes to evacuate and warn others. Time seemed to stretch impossibly. 5 minutes felt like an hour. Then finally the 2 firefighters emerged from the building, supporting Mrs. Kowalski between them. She was conscious but clearly disoriented, and EMTs rushed forward with a gurney. "She's okay," one of the firefighters announced to the crowd. "Smoke inhalation, but she's going to be fine." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the assembled residents. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, tears of relief, exhaustion, and the delayed shock of how close they'd all come to disaster. "Mom," a fire captain approached Sarah. "I understand you were the one who initiated the evacuation and alerted us about Mrs. Kowalski. I just knocked on doors and called 911. Anyone would have done it. Not everyone would have remembered a vulnerable resident in the chaos. Your quick thinking likely saved lives today." He glanced down at Noel, who sat quietly at Emma's feet. "Was it your dog that alerted you to the fire?" Sarah hesitated. "Actually, we just found him a few days ago. He's a stray. But yes, he started acting strangely, and that's what woke me up." The fire captain crouched down, extending his hand for Noel to sniff. "Smart boy. Dogs have incredible instincts for danger." He stood and addressed the crowd. "The fire originated in the basement electrical system. We've contained it, but there's significant smoke and water damage to the first 2 floors. 3rd and 4th floors have smoke damage as well. The building will need to be inspected before anyone can return, and some apartments may be uninhabitable for a while." Sarah's heart sank. Where would they go? She barely had enough money for this month's rent, let alone deposits and moving costs for a new place. "The Red Cross is setting up a shelter at the community center on Marlborough Street," the captain continued. "They'll provide temporary accommodation and assistance." As the morning wore on and the adrenaline faded, the reality of their situation began to sink in. Sarah watched firefighters carry equipment in and out of the building, saw her neighbors making phone calls to family members, arranging places to stay. She pulled out her phone to call Jennifer, but her sister would be at work now, and their small suburban house barely had room for Jennifer's own family. "Mom?" Emma looked up at her with those wise, worried eyes. "Are we going to be homeless?" "No, baby, we'll figure something out. We always do." But even as she said it, Sarah felt the weight of everything pressing down on her. The bills she couldn't pay, the Christmas she couldn't afford, and now this. How many times could a person start over before they simply ran out of strength? Noel pressed his head against her leg, as if sensing her despair. Sarah looked down at the dog they'd rescued just 3 days ago, the dog who had in turn rescued them this morning. His golden eyes met hers with an almost human understanding. "Thank you," she whispered, running her hand over his head. "Thank you for waking us up." A news van pulled up to the curb, and a reporter began setting up a camera. Sarah turned away, pulling Emma closer. They didn't need to be on the evening news, didn't need their private struggles broadcast for public consumption. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. The fire captain was being interviewed, and Sarah heard him mention a vigilant resident and her rescue dog, who had helped evacuate the building. The reporter's eyes scanned the crowd and landed on Sarah, Emma, and Noel. "Excuse me," the reporter approached with a cameraman in tow. "Are you the woman with the rescue dog? Could we get a quick interview?" "I'd really rather not." "Please, Mom." Emma tugged on her sleeve. "Noel's a hero, everyone should know." Sarah looked at her daughter's eager face, then at the crowd of neighbors who had gathered around, some nodding encouragement. Mr. Patterson gave her a thumbs up. Mrs. Chen, holding one of her babies, smiled gratefully. "Okay," Sarah said quietly, but just quickly. The interview was brief. Sarah explained how Noel had alerted them to the danger, how they'd evacuated and warned their neighbors. Emma chimed in about finding Noel on the street just days before, and the reporter's eyes lit up at the heartwarming angle. "So this stray dog you rescued ended up saving your lives?" the reporter asked. Sarah looked down at Noel, who sat calmly beside Emma despite the cameras and commotion. "I guess he did. We saved each other." What Sarah didn't know, as the cameras rolled and the interview aired on the noon news, was that hundreds of miles away in Portland, Maine, someone was watching. Someone who had been searching desperately for a lost German Shepherd mix for 3 weeks. Someone whose heart would leap with recognition at the sight of that familiar brown and black coat, those golden eyes. But that revelation would come later. For now, as the December sun climbed higher in the sky and the temperature remained stubbornly below freezing, Sarah focused on the immediate problem, where they would sleep that night and how they would rebuild their lives from the ashes. The community center shelter was chaos barely contained by Red Cross volunteers. Cots lined the gymnasium floor, and the air smelled of coffee, anxiety, and too many people in too small a space. Sarah sat on the edge of a cot with Emma curled against her side, Noel lying protectively at their feet. "I'm hungry," Emma whispered. "I know, sweetie. They said dinner would be ready soon." Sarah checked her phone for the 100th time. Jennifer had called, frantic after seeing the news, insisting Sarah and Emma come stay with her. But Jennifer lived 40 minutes away in the suburbs, and Sarah would have to transfer Emma to a different school mid-year, find a new job, uproot their entire lives. Again, the text from her landlord had come an hour ago. "Building inspector says third-floor units need extensive repairs, at least 2 to 3 months before habitable, will return security deposits within 30 days. 30 days. Sarah almost laughed at the absurdity. Her security deposit had been $800, barely enough for first and last month's rent anywhere in Boston, even if she could find a landlord willing to rent to someone with her credit score and a dog. A dog. Sarah looked down at Noel, who had his chin rested on his paws but his eyes alert, watching everyone who passed by. The shelter had initially told them no pets allowed, but after seeing the news coverage of Noel's heroism, they'd made an exception. Small miracles. "Sarah Martinez," a volunteer approached with a clipboard. "There's someone here to see you. She says it's urgent." Sarah's first thought was Jennifer, but her sister had said she couldn't get away until tomorrow. She followed the volunteer to the lobby area, Emma and Noel trailing behind. The woman waiting there was in her mid-50s, well-dressed in a wool coat and leather boots that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly salary. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, and her eyes, sharp and assessing, fixed on Noel immediately. "Ms. Martinez, I'm Rebecca Walsh. I saw your interview on the news." She crouched down, studying Noel intently. "May I?" Sarah nodded, confused, as Rebecca gently lifted Noel's left ear, examining something. The dog submitted calmly, seeming to sense this woman meant no harm. "I knew it," Rebecca breathed. She looked up at Sarah with tears in her eyes. "This is Apollo, my son's dog. He went missing from our summer house in Maine 3 weeks ago." Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "What? No, this is Noel. We found him on the street 4 days ago." "I'm sure you did, but this is definitely Apollo." Rebecca pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos. "See, same marking on his left ear, that small white patch, and this scar on his front paw? He got that as a puppy, cutting himself on a fence." Sarah looked at the photos, then at Noel, Apollo, and felt her heart breaking. The resemblance was undeniable. Every distinctive marking matched. "My son Michael is in the Marines. He's stationed overseas. Apollo was his service dog after his first deployment, helped him with his PTSD. Rebecca's voice cracked. "When Apollo went missing, Michael was devastated. I've been searching everywhere, driven down to Boston twice checking shelters, posting on every lost pet website. But we found him here. How did he get to Boston from Maine?" "The summer house is in Portland. It's only a 2-hour drive. I think he might have jumped into someone's truck or been picked up by someone who brought him down here. Then he got loose again." Rebecca stroked Noel's head, and the dog's tail wagged slowly, as if recognizing something familiar. "Oh, Apollo. We've been so worried about you." Emma had been silent through this exchange, but now she grabbed Sarah's hand, her small fingers trembling. "Mum, does this mean Noel has to leave?" Rebecca seemed to notice Emma for the first time, really see her. This small girl in second-hand clothes, standing in a Red Cross shelter after losing her home. Her expression softened. "I'm sorry. This must be incredibly difficult. The news said you just rescued him." 3 days ago, Sarah said quietly. "The night before the fire. He saved our lives. We wouldn't have woken up in time without him. I saw. That's why I came as soon as I saw the story." Rebecca stood, torn between relief and sympathy. "I can't tell you what this means, finding him, but I can see he means something to you too." Sarah felt tears burning in her throat. Of course, the dog belonged to someone. Of course, their one piece of good fortune in months was just another borrowed thing that would be taken away. That was how her life worked now. "When does Michael come home?" Sarah asked, forcing herself to think practically. "Not until March. He's on deployment." Rebecca hesitated. "I was planning to care for Apollo until then, but I travel extensively for work. I'm actually leaving for Singapore in 2 days for a month-long consulting project. I'd planned to board Apollo at a kennel, but after everything he's been through, being in a kennel for a month seems cruel." An idea was forming, but Sarah was almost afraid to voice it. What if we kept him until Michael comes home? Just temporarily. "Emma and I were good with him and he clearly helped us. Maybe we could help him too until his real owner returns." "Mom, really?" Emma's face lit up with desperate hope. Rebecca studied them both carefully. "You're living in a shelter. I don't mean to be rude, but how would you care for a dog when you don't even have a home?" The words stung because they were true. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with shame. "You're right. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking clearly." "Wait." Rebecca held up a hand. "I didn't say no. I'm just trying to understand your situation. The news mentioned the fire, but what's your long-term plan?" Sarah almost laughed. Long-term plan, as if she had one. "I'm a nurse at Boston General. I have a job, but I need to find an apartment that allows dogs, which is nearly impossible in my price range. My sister offered to let us stay with her, but that's out in the suburbs, and—" She stopped, hearing herself make excuses. "What if I could help with that?" Rebecca said slowly. "I own several properties in the city. One of them, a brownstone in South End, has a vacant first-floor apartment. The previous tenants moved out last month. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean, safe, and it allows pets." Sarah's heart leaped, then immediately fell. "I can't afford South End. I can barely afford where we were living. What if the rent was reasonable? Say what you were paying before." "Why would you do that? You don't even know us." Rebecca looked down at Apollo, who had moved to sit between Sarah and Emma, as if trying to bridge the gap between his old life and his new one. "Because Apollo clearly bonded with you. Because you saved his life and he saved yours. And because—" She paused, her professional facade cracking slightly. "Because my son is overseas fighting for our country, dealing with trauma and nightmares, and knowing his dog is safe and cared for would give him peace. The few emails I've received from him have all asked about Apollo." "I don't accept charity," Sarah said stiffly, even as she felt Emma's hopeful grip on her hand. "It's not charity. It's a business arrangement." Rebecca pulled a card from her wallet. "You keep Apollo safe, healthy, and happy until Michael returns in March. In exchange, you get the apartment at a reduced rate, and I'll cover Apollo's vet bills and food costs while he's in your care. When Michael comes home, Apollo goes back to him. Clean, simple. And if we get too attached, if Emma—" Sarah looked down at her daughter, who was already crying. "This will break her heart in March." "I know." Rebecca's voice was gentle. "But isn't 3 months of happiness worth the heartbreak? Isn't that better than nothing at all?" Sarah thought about the past year of her life, the divorce, the financial struggles, the constant weight of barely surviving. Every good thing seemed temporary, every moment of peace borrowed against future pain. But Emma's face, looking up at her with such desperate hope, made the decision for her. "Okay," Sarah said, "but I pay full rent. I won't take reduced rent. Apollo's company is payment enough." Rebecca smiled, the kind of smile that suggested she was used to negotiating with stubborn people. "How about this? You pay what you can afford, whatever that is, and we call it even." They shook hands, and Emma threw her arms around Noel, Apollo sobbing with relief. The dog licked her face, his tail wagging, seeming to understand that his pack had just grown more secure. "There's one more thing," Rebecca said. "I'd like to visit occasionally to check on Apollo and send pictures to Michael. Would that be acceptable?" "Of course." As Rebecca left to make arrangements, Sarah sank back down on the cot, overwhelmed. In the span of an hour, they'd lost Noel and gained him back, lost their home and found a new one. Her head spun with the rapid reversals of fortune. "Mum," Emma snuggled against her. "Is this really happening? We get to keep Noel until March? Until March, Sarah confirmed, stroking her daughter's hair. Then he goes home to his real owner. But we're his real owners too, right? For now? Sarah looked at Apollo, who was looking back at her with those knowing golden eyes, and she thought about how sometimes life gave you exactly what you needed, even if it was only temporary. Yes, baby. For now, we're his real family. That night, Sarah lay awake on the cot long after Emma had fallen asleep. Tomorrow they would move into the South End apartment. Tomorrow, she would start rebuilding their lives again, knowing that in 3 months they would lose the dog, who had become, impossibly quickly, a part of their family. But for now, for this moment, they had a home and they had each other, and they had Apollo, sleeping peacefully at the foot of their cot, one paw stretched protectively toward Emma. Sometimes, Sarah thought, borrowed happiness was all you got. The trick was learning to be grateful for it anyway. Christmas morning dawned cold and clear over Boston. Sarah woke to find Emma already up, sitting cross-legged on the floor of their South End apartment with Apollo's head in her lap, both of them watching the first light paint the hardwood floors gold. "Merry Christmas, Mom," Emma whispered, not wanting to break the peaceful silence. "Merry Christmas, sweetie." The apartment was small, just 2 bedrooms, a galley kitchen, and a living room with a decorative fireplace that didn't work. But it was warm and safe and theirs, at least for the next 2 months. Sarah had worked double shifts the past 3 weeks to cover rent and start rebuilding their savings. Jennifer had helped with furniture, a couch from her garage, a kitchen table from a neighbor who was moving, and slowly the space had become home. The Christmas tree standing in the corner was modest, a 4-foot spruce Sarah had found at a lot on Christmas Eve, marked down to $15 because of its slightly crooked trunk. They decorated it with paper chains Emma had made at school and a few precious ornaments salvaged from their old apartment after the fire damage had been assessed. Under the tree sat 3 gifts, a new set of colored pencils for Emma, a book Sarah had been wanting, and a thick, luxurious dog bed for Apollo. "Should we wake him up for presents?" Emma asked. "I think he's already awake, sweetheart. He's just enjoying the quiet time with you." As if to confirm this, Apollo's tail thumped softly against the floor. They opened presents slowly, savoring each small treasure. Emma drew an elaborate picture of the 3 of them, her, Sarah, and Apollo, standing in front of their new apartment. Sarah read the first chapter of her book aloud, while Emma tested out every single colored pencil. Apollo settled onto his new bed with a contented sigh, finally having something soft to sleep on, besides Emma's bedroom floor. "Mom," Emma said after a while, "do you think Apollo's real owner will like him as much as we do?" They'd taken to calling him both names interchangeably, unable to quite commit to either. Sarah knew this was part of Emma's way of protecting her heart, keeping some distance from the inevitable goodbye that loomed in March. "I think Michael will love him very much. Rebecca says Apollo helped Michael through some really hard times." "Like Apollo helped us?" Exactly like that. The doorbell rang, startling them both. Sarah checked her phone. 8:47 a.m. Who would visit on Christmas morning? Rebecca Walsh stood on the doorstep, but she wasn't alone. Next to her was a young man in marine dress blues, his dark hair cut military short, his posture rigid with obvious tension. He couldn't have been more than 25. His eyes, the same sharp, assessing eyes as his mother's, were fixed on the doorway, searching. "Rebecca!" Sarah's mind raced. "I thought Michael wasn't coming home until March." "Change of plans," Rebecca said, her voice tight with emotion. "He got emergency leave, arrived last night. He insisted on coming this morning. I know this is earlier than we discussed." But she didn't finish, because Apollo had appeared in the doorway. The dog froze, every muscle in his body tense. His ears pricked forward. For one suspended moment, nothing moved. Then Michael dropped to his knees right there on the front step. "Apollo," he said, and his voice cracked on the name. "Apollo, buddy. I'm here. I'm home." The dog exploded forward with a joy Sarah had never seen from him, a full-body wiggle of ecstatic recognition. He bowled Michael over, licking his face, whining and barking and trembling all over. Michael wrapped his arms around the dog and buried his face in Apollo's fur, his shoulders shaking with sobs he couldn't control. Rebecca turned away, wiping at her eyes. Sarah felt Emma grip her hand, and she squeezed back, her own tears falling freely. "I thought I'd lost you," Michael was saying over and over. "I thought you were gone. I thought I'd never see you again." It took several minutes before Michael could compose himself enough to stand. Apollo pressed against his legs, refusing to leave his side even for a second. The bond between them was undeniable. This was a military working dog and his handler, reunited after trauma and separation. "Ms. Martinez," Michael said, finally looking at Sarah. His eyes were red, but his voice was steady. "My mom told me everything. What you did for Apollo, how he saved you and your daughter. I can't—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I can't thank you enough. He saved our lives," Sarah said simply, "and gave us hope when we didn't have any. We should be thanking you." Emma had been hiding behind Sarah, but now she stepped forward bravely. "Are you taking Noel, Apollo, away now?" Michael looked at the little girl, then at his mother, then back at Sarah. "Is that okay? I know we said March, but—" "Of course," Sarah interrupted, even as her heart shattered. "He's your dog. He clearly belongs with you." But Emma's face crumpled, and despite her best efforts to be brave, she began to cry. Quiet, devastating sobs that she tried to muffle in her hands. Apollo immediately pulled away from Michael and went to her, pressing his body against her legs in the same comforting gesture he'd offered Sarah so many times over the past 3 weeks. Michael watched this with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. Finally, he spoke. "Emma, right? Would you like to sit down? I think we should all talk." They moved into the living room, an odd little gathering on Christmas morning. Rebecca perched on the arm of the sofa, while Michael sat on the floor with Apollo between him and Emma, who had stopped crying but looked utterly miserable. "Emma," Michael said gently, "how long have you had Apollo?" 3 weeks and 4 days, Emma whispered. "We found him on December 1st. "And you've been taking good care of him?" Emma nodded. "We brush him every day, and we take him for walks, and he sleeps in my room, and I read to him sometimes." "He likes that, the reading." "I think so. He always lies down and listens." Michael smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face. "He did that with me, too. When things got bad, when I couldn't sleep, I used to read to him, usually boring military manuals, but he didn't seem to mind." He reached out and scratched Apollo behind the ears, and the dog leaned into it with obvious pleasure, his tail wagging, but his eyes kept darting back to Emma, as if making sure she was okay. "Here's what I'm thinking," Michael said slowly. "I'm on leave for 3 weeks, but then I have to report back. After that, I've got another 4 months before my tour is done, and I'm stateside permanently." He looked at his mother. "I can't take Apollo with me overseas, and I don't want him in a kennel for 4 months. That's no life for a dog who's already been through trauma." "What are you suggesting?" Rebecca asked carefully. "I'm suggesting Emma and Ms. Martinez keep Apollo until June. Let me spend time with him these 3 weeks. I can visit every day, take him for walks, make sure he remembers me. Then when I ship out, he stays here. And in June, when I'm done for good, we figure out what happens next." "But that's 6 months," Emma said, her voice small and afraid to hope. "We'd have him for 6 more months? If that's okay with your mom." Sarah's mind was spinning. 6 months was a lifetime. 6 months was enough time to become completely attached, to make saying goodbye impossibly painful. But looking at Emma's face, at the desperate hope blooming there, she couldn't say no. "That's more than okay," Sarah said. "But Michael, are you sure? Don't you want him with you?" Michael was quiet for a moment, his hand resting on Apollo's head. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "The thing about military dogs, about service dogs, is that they teach you something important. They teach you that sometimes the best way to love something is to let it help someone else." He looked at Emma. "Apollo saved my life once. In Afghanistan, there was an IED, and he found it before our squad walked into the blast radius. And after that, when I came home with nightmares and couldn't sleep, he saved me again just by being there." He paused, stroking Apollo's ears. "But right now, you need him more than I do. You and your mom. I can see it. And Apollo. He's always known who needed him most. That's his gift. So yeah, I'm sure." Emma threw her arms around Apollo, crying again, but this time with relief. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Rebecca was crying too now, not even trying to hide it. "You're a good man, Michael. I learned from the best." He smiled at his mother, then at Sarah. "Plus, this gives me an excuse to visit Boston regularly. I'll come every chance I get, spend time with Apollo, make sure he's happy. And maybe," he looked at Emma, "maybe you can send me pictures sometimes. Let me know how he's doing." "I can send you pictures every day," Emma said eagerly, "and videos, and I can tell you about all our adventures." They spent the rest of Christmas morning talking, making plans. Michael would visit every day for the next 3 weeks, sometimes taking Apollo out alone, sometimes including Emma and Sarah. They'd establish a routine, make sure the transition was smooth. Rebecca offered to continue covering food and vet expenses. Sarah insisted on paying for half, and they compromised on splitting it. When they finally left, with promises to return the next morning, Emma stood at the window watching until Michael's car disappeared around the corner. "Mum, is it okay if I love Apollo even though he belongs to someone else?" Sarah pulled her daughter close. "Baby, I think that's exactly what we're supposed to do. Love him completely for as long as we have him, and when June comes we'll love him enough to let him go home. But this is his home too, for now. Yes, Sarah agreed, looking at Apollo, who had settled on his new bed with a contented sigh. For now this is his home. The rest of December passed in a blur of visits and routines and small, precious moments. Michael came every day as promised, and watching him with Apollo was like watching two halves of a whole reunite. But he was also gentle with Emma, teaching her commands and tricks, showing her how to read Apollo's body language and understand his needs. On New Year's Eve, Sarah worked the late shift at the hospital. Jennifer came to stay with Emma, and they watched the ball drop on TV with Apollo sprawled across both their laps. When Sarah came home at 1 in the morning, exhausted but content, she found them all asleep on the couch, her daughter, her sister, and the dog, who had somehow saved them all. January brought snow and ice, and Michael's departure back to duty. Emma cried when they said goodbye, but Michael promised to email every week and video call whenever he could, and he did, faithfully, asking for updates on Apollo and sending pictures from overseas. February brought Emma's 8th birthday, and Rebecca showed up with a cake and a card from Michael with a gift certificate to the bookstore. He wanted to make sure Apollo's girl got something special, Rebecca explained. By March, the rhythm of their lives had settled into something Sarah hadn't felt in years: stability. She'd paid off most of the debt from the divorce. Emma was thriving at school, her grades improving, her smile coming more easily. And Apollo. Apollo had filled a hole in their small family they hadn't known existed. On March 15th, Sarah got an email from Rebecca. Michael's tour had been extended by 2 months. He wouldn't be home until late June now. Was it still okay if Apollo stayed? Sarah showed the email to Emma, expecting disappointment at the delayed reunion. Instead, Emma looked thoughtful. "Mom, do you think when Michael comes home in June, do you think maybe he could visit us sometimes? Like even after he takes Apollo back? Because I think I'd miss Michael too now." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Her daughter, who had lost so much and hardened herself against more loss, was already preparing to grieve. "We can ask him, baby. I'm sure he'd like that." But what Sarah didn't expect was the email that came 3 days later. Not from Rebecca, but from Michael himself. "Ms. Martinez," it read, "I've been thinking a lot about Apollo and about June. I'm getting out of the Marines when my tour ends. I've done my time and I'm ready to be home. My mom mentioned you're a nurse and I'm starting EMT training this fall. I was wondering, is there any chance you'd want a roommate? Someone to split rent and help with Apollo? I know it's a weird request, but it seems like maybe we're all better together than apart. If you're interested, let me know. If not, no hard feelings. Michael." Sarah read the email 3 times, her heart pounding. Then she walked into Emma's room where her daughter was reading to Apollo on her bed. "Emma, how would you feel about Michael living with us? After he comes home?" Emma looked up, her eyes wide. "Really? Like, permanently?" "Maybe. He'd help with rent and take care of Apollo. We'd be like a team." Emma was quiet for a long moment, thinking it through with her 8-year-old wisdom. Finally, she smiled, the biggest, brightest smile Sarah had seen since before the divorce. "I think Apollo would like that, and I would too." That night, Sarah typed a response. "Michael, we'd love to have you. See you in June. Sarah." April brought unexpected warmth and the first crocuses pushing through the last snow. May brought Michael's birthday, which they celebrated with a video call and a care package filled with Emma's drawings and a new collar for Apollo. And June. June brought Michael home. Sarah and Emma waited at the airport with Apollo, who seemed to sense something important was happening. When Michael emerged from the gate in civilian clothes, looking younger and less burdened than he had at Christmas, Apollo's recognition was immediate and joyful. But this time there was no desperation in it, no fear of separation. This was a reunion with the certainty of togetherness ahead. Michael hugged his mother, then turned to Emma and Sarah. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Emma took his hand on one side, Sarah's on the other. "Ready." As they walked through the airport, this unlikely family forged from fire and loss, and a stray dog who had known exactly who needed saving, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope of someone drowning, but the quiet, steady hope of someone who had learned to swim. Apollo trotted beside them, his tail wagging, his purpose fulfilled. He had saved them all one by one and brought them together into something stronger than the sum of their broken parts. That night, in the South End apartment that was now truly home, they celebrated with pizza and stories and laughter. Emma fell asleep on the couch between Michael and Sarah. Apollo stretched across all 3 of them, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Sarah looked at her life and thought, This is enough. This is more than enough. This is everything. Outside, Boston hummed with its usual chaos and beauty. Inside, a family slept, the family that a stray dog had built, one rescue at a time. And in the morning, they would wake up together and begin again. No longer broken, no longer alone, just home. And so we reach the end of another unforgettable journey. If this story touched your heart, stirred your emotions, or simply made you feel something, you can help me in 3 simple ways. Leave your like. It's quick, free, and shows me I'm on the right path. Subscribe and turn on the bell to never miss our upcoming stories. Comment below what moment struck you the most in this story. Every like, every subscription, every comment motivates me to bring you more engaging emotional stories full of twists and turns. And if you know someone who would love this story, share it. Sometimes a good narrative is exactly what someone needs for their day. Thank you for being here with me. See you in the next story.